American University in Bulgaria.
Today that we'll welcome Ambassador Poptodorova to campus. She has been a longtime friend of the university, having served as a member of the board since the mid-1990s. She comes from a family with a long tradition of civil service and public service, a tradition she has continued herself, joining the ranks of the diplomatic corps of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the 1970s, and serving as a member of parliament in the Bulgarian parliament since the very early days of transition. I was wondering last night, I like generally to find a catchy syntax when I introduce a speaker, and I was wondering what can I say that would sound, something in 2-3 words that can summarize Ambassador Poptodorova's profile and career. And I would say that she is a transatlantic translator, that she is a cultural communicator east and west. Somebody that crosses borders and crosses the Atlantic with facility, not because of her linguistic skills, though there are many, but because she has served for 10 years as ambassador to the United States, and because as a diplomat, this is something that she does on a regular basis in translating US policies to Bulgarian public and the Bulgarian national interest and European view of the world to the American public. She comes to campus within this quite extraordinary historic anniversary moments that we're living this fall, from the 100 years anniversary of the beginning of World War I to the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Ambassador Poptodorova.
Good afternoon to all of you who decided to spend couple of hours, an hour and a half on a Friday afternoon right here, rather than running off to your weekend already. So dear guests, dear faculty, dear students, I'm coming here after a number of similar events. The first one was an invitation from Senator Lugar back in the US to speak on the occasion of 100th anniversary of World War I, which is extremely relevant to the whole subject matter which we will be talking about today as well, although some of you may not even suspect it. Then I moved on to Berlin, where I was invited to speak on this same occasion, the 25th anniversary. And here I am. Why I'm mentioning this? Because not only these previous times, but as far as I remember, I've never had a better introduction, Ms. Natasya. Even if I were to try to describe myself succinctly, I would have never ended up with that brilliant interpretation. And obviously, and why I'm reacting so spontaneously, because this has been the essence of all my years of service. And if I've succeeded to a little bit contribute to what we call Bulgaria today, a transatlantic country, a very close ally of the United States of America, if we manage to do this, then I can humbly accept this description. Thank you, Sen, for many things, but I will spell out just two. For never despairing regarding this lecture series, and here we are, back to years back, and really thank you to the Commission, and also for doing all the whole long list of thank yous, which is always a tricky one, and you always run the risk of forgetting someone you didn't. And I know why, because you've lived through all this every year so wholeheartedly that all the supporters, all the actors in this lecture series are so close to what you've been doing so excellently. I made a mistake when I briefly took one seat over there, and I faced Dimi. I was going to say that I'm dedicating this occasion and this lecture with all due humility to him. And I probably would have done this in a more composed manner if I hadn't looked at this beautiful photo of his, which took me back to not only our beginnings as AUBG, but to Bulgaria's very complex, uneasy, and painful history. It took me to how an individual can make a difference. There is this beautiful phrase which says, larger than life. Yes, he was. I'm humbled to believe that if I ever had a mentor, it was him. We should all be very, very happy and grateful that he laid such a deep imprint on this institution and on Bulgaria's life post-1990. Dimi desperately wanted one thing: memory. Memory to be kept, preserved, and taken forward. I'm afraid we've failed him in certain ways. We need to tell the story of what Bulgaria has been, of all the fights and struggles and sacrifice Bulgarians have made, and we're still missing whole periods in our history. I'm very happy that in the board we are already discussing a way to remedy a gap, obviously, and to have AUBG as a front runner in teaching modern history to our younger populations. So, Dim is with us today with his beautiful photo and with his spirit and with his expectations for what we are to do. The other mistake I did was to somehow believe that this is my folder, which it is not. So may I exchange folders? And you will know why I need some pages here with me today. Because I would like to give a, it's complicated. I know I will be incomplete, but I definitely want to argue today why AUBG is so important since 1992. Not only in terms of its modern role, but also as a bearer of legacy and of spirit. And I definitely need these historical remarks handy. Because I would like to tell the story of America's influence in this country. Few people know how old it is. And even those of us who know need to remember it out loud as often as we can. Few people know that contacts between the peoples of Bulgaria and the United States began even before the establishment of the modern Bulgarian state, which happened in 1879. And the Bulgarians' interest in America rose simultaneously with the opening of America towards European affairs. The interest of the United States in Bulgaria was born by their economic interests in the Ottoman Empire. But at the same time, there was spiritual and cultural influence which grew to the activities of and thanks to the activities of the Protestant missionaries in America. At the time of the US Civil War, they had already turned their attention to the so-called Near East at the time, and they traveled across the vast provinces of the Ottoman Empire. I did make a reference to World War I and its importance and relevance to 21st 5 years of the fall of the wall, because we're talking empires in a way. The World War I goal eventually, and I'm not going into all the misconceptions and misjudgments and miscalculations that led to its outbreak, nor would I argue in detail the fact that it's hard to judge whether the miscalculations and the lack of solid judgment in making this war possible or in starting the war are worse than the treaties that were signed afterwards and the post-treaty legacy, because that's another historic argument I'm not entering into. But what I'm saying is that the fall, the dissolution of empires followed. One of these, the Ottoman Empire, obviously took longer. One may ironically argue that it's even not yet fully complete in terms of the situation in Southeastern Europe. But basically, what was happening even before its formal disintegration began, and when Bulgaria was a non-entity, it was just a kind of territory or province in nominal terms belonging to a powerful empire, there was practically no one from the outside world who would show interest and commitment to a population which was barely known. And this was the Americans. And that's why I want to take you through a story of educational, cultural, and philanthropic interest of the Americans for many more years than we probably would think about today. The first Protestant missionaries were sent by a Protestant religious society, which was called the American Board of Commissionaries for Foreign Missions. And they arrived here in 1839 because they were given permission to preach to the Christian population by the Ottoman government. At that time, the first guide to Bulgarian grammar for foreigners was published in 1843. That was novelty to me. That's why I need my sheets of paper here. Which was a way of helping other foreigners not only know more about Bulgaria, but learn the Bulgarian language itself. In the following years, the activities of American missionaries were already closely connected with the Bulgarians in their struggle for enlightenment, for secular education, and an independent church. Actually, another red line which you will see, or not red line, no, a thread, which you will note in my presentation is practically very simple. There is no other country, no other nation that has influenced as strongly Bulgarian education as America. Full stop. Of course, in communist times, we know how things developed, which was an instrumentalized, ideological way of influencing education in Bulgaria. But in years when education developed basically on educational grounds, it was America. It was the American missionaries, it was the American people, American journalists that practically shaped the education in this country as a secular endeavor in the times when, as I say, Bulgaria had nothing as a sovereignty or independent country. Having said this, I must say that Bulgarians, even in the years of political oppression under the Turkish rule, were far more informed about America, about inventions in various spheres of life, and most of all, about the ideas of human rights. The echo of the fundamental documents of the American Revolution and the struggle for building an independent state and a free civil society, like the Declaration of Independence of 1776, the Constitution and the Declaration of Human Rights, can be easily discovered in a number of proclamations, appeals and speeches of representatives of the Bulgarian revival and the national liberation movement. During those periods, Bulgaria received not only moral, but also material support from America, particularly in the sphere of education. We come now to the specific role and mission of the Protestant missionaries. The schools and the newspapers founded by them contributed to the Bulgarian national awakening the most. The American missionaries who returned to the United States often became unofficial diplomats for Bulgaria. The most prominent among them are Dr. George Washburn, who was director and president of Robert College, and Dr. Albert Long, who was involved in the first complete translation of the Bible in Bulgarian. Robert College, an institution, and I must say that again in a very lofty, emotional way. If I'm to compare the role of AUBG, I would immediately, instinctively go back to Robert College. Education served as one of the most important commonalities through which the Americans and Bulgarians began to understand each other. In 1857, James and Williams Dwight, who were the sons of the missionary Dr. White and graduates of Yale University, presented their idea for the creation of Robert College in the Ottoman Empire, in Istanbul, to Christopher Robert, who was a New York tradesman and philanthropist. In 1864, the trustees were officially registered, and this institution became known as a branch of the State University of New York, and then through that registration of the Board of Trustees, its legal status was also arranged. Although it had opened doors a little bit earlier, in September of 1863. It's interesting to note that the subjects it taught were history, economics, logic, political history, international law, philosophy, English language. The graduates were taught to respect each other, and each one had the opportunity to become a respectful representative of their country. Robert College was a social phenomenon, attracting students from the region, something familiar, with its free spirit, open educational system, and excellent teachers, faculty. That's for you. That's why the Bulgarian bourgeois preferred to send their children to study there instead of sending them to Western Europe, where the educational system was more rigid and there were no programs in their mother tongue. Most of the Bulgarians who graduated from the Robert College became diplomats, politicians, and statesmen. By 1868, half of the student body were Bulgarian. 3 future prime ministers of Bulgaria got their education there. An explanation for this American enthusiasm to help the educational development of the peoples in the Ottoman Empire, of which Bulgarians benefited the most, can be found in the Zornitsa Newspaper in its issue of July 23rd, 1876. And here it goes. They call the Robert College this perfect educational institution. The educated traveler always notes with curiosity that this place is a meeting point of the ancient and the modern, the Eastern and the Western. It stands like a lighthouse and aids the illumination of the East with the rays of Western education. End of quote. For the same purpose, the American missionaries opened also schools in Plovdiv, Stara Zagora, and Samokov. Plovdiv housed or hosted the School for Boys, which was opened in October of 1860. The lessons in chemistry and physics were accompanied by demonstrations, which was a novelty in education at that time. There were also lessons in English in which Bulgarians already showed interest in learning the language. within the school, those engaged in both teaching and the students and their family, they talked with American missionaries about the prospects of the Bulgarian church to be separated from the Greek and from the Greek patriarchate, respectively. And these ideas that were just beginning at the time were met with their support and encouragement. Later on, in 1871, the school was moved to Samokov. A school for girls was opened in Stara Zagora in 1863. It taught some general subjects, also housekeeping and sewing, which I miss personally. This school also moved to Samokov later on, at a later stage. This school, according to the advertisement of 1878, aims, and I quote, to give high Christian education to Bulgarian girls. The curriculum included mainly religion, English, Bulgarian, and natural sciences. There was also musical education, which included piano and singing. In 1882, the overall number of students was 499. These two schools laid the foundations of the American College in Sofia. Hundreds of Bulgarians graduated from the college and worked as priests, social workers, government officials, and teachers. In 1872, an American theological seminary was opened in Samokov. The influence of the American school, as it was referred to at the time, by the locals and in the local press, spread out to neighboring towns and villages. The same was true for the schools for boys and girls, I already mentioned. And all these maybe smaller but very energetic, very vigorous schools practically continued the tradition of Robert College in educating young Bulgarians and preparing them for public positions in the field of science and public administration. American missionaries also founded the Zornitsa Newspaper. Dawn, again hard to translate, Zornitsa, which existed for 76 years. This newspaper can rightly be included among the cultural institutions which contributed to the enlightenment of the Bulgarian people. I didn't mention the anniversaries which we all think of today, but there was one important holiday on the 1st of the month, November the 1st, which is not exactly international, it's very Bulgarian. And this is called the Day of the National Revival, the National Awakening. Another hard word to translate. I'll use it in Bulgarian because I would very much hope our American friends to somehow learn it. Buditeli. This again grabs you by the heart because this is not, it is of course teachers, it is professors, it is all of that, it is educators, but it's so much more than that. This is all these people who do this for a living, but who have their entire heart into enthusing those who have not been yet engaged in educational or cultural activity, those who would like to bring new ideas to a whole society, to bring modern ideas to their minds. The awakening is the period when Bulgarians begin to become more conscious of themselves as a nation, of course, but also as a nation of history, of dignity, of self-respect. I can never overestimate the content of this word buditeli. Please make the effort and remember the Bulgarian word because you can never, ever render it in any foreign language. That was November the 1st. And in a way, I think that we are also marking this anniversary by remembering all these budители who were trained by the American budители in those years, when Bulgaria was Ottoman Empire, nothing more. And here is one buditel, Zornitsa Newspaper, I'm so excited about as first of all, 76 years. Can you imagine that? In so many different times. And secondly, the ideas that they tried to relay to the Bulgarians. So this newspaper was published by the American Protestant Society in Bulgaria. It provided abundant information about the social and political life of the United States, about technical innovations and culture. It gave tribune for discussions regarding the future development of Bulgarian society. It also spoke a lot about the struggle for independence, the rights and freedoms of citizens. I need to mention here the name of a famous American, very famous in this country for sure. And this is the American war correspondent, Januarius McGahan, who at that time worked for the New York Herald and the London Daily News. He traveled through Bulgaria after the 1876 uprising and exposed to the world the atrocities which were committed by Turkish soldiers and the massacre of Bulgarian civilians. Due to his information coming from the heart of Bulgaria, public outrage evoked in Europe. And his dispatches were actually a major factor in preventing Britain from supporting Turkey in the Russian-Turkish War of 1877-78, which led to Bulgaria getting independence from the Ottoman Empire. Again, a kind of a half liberation. Bulgaria was only liberated in half. It was a divided country. Other nations, and believe me, I constantly face this as an ambassador, other nations would normally have one very clear date, historic date, to mark their own state days and national days. I always have to explain that we have three dates which practically, in a span of 30 years, that brought eventually to a sovereign, a independent Bulgaria. Liberation, unification, independence. That speaks for itself, and that explains again why, given this extremely painful history of Bulgaria, we should always have a very special appreciation for the role of these missionaries. Missionaries not just by religious vocation, but missionaries in their instincts, in their bigger goals regarding the population of the country. Actually, American missionaries were among the first to warn the Bulgarians in 1878 about the responsibilities they face in their first steps in building the young Bulgarian state, about the risks of any hasty decision or rush action. In a succession of articles in Zornitsa Newspaper, the Bulgarian readers were acquainted with the American Constitution and the principles underlying it, with the structure of the administration, the division of power, the separation of the church from the state, and the protection of the rights and freedoms of citizens. 1903 marks the official establishment of diplomatic relations between the Principality of Bulgaria at the time and the United States of America. The first decades of the 20th century were actually a time of expanding political, diplomatic, and economic interactions between Bulgaria and the United States. I did mention the time of World War I, preceded by the Balkan Wars. which made a long period of wars and losses for Bulgaria, territorial losses, financial losses and reparations. When the peace treaty was signed after the end of World War I, President Wilson, Woodrow Wilson, proclaimed the goal of a war for freedom, justice, and self-government. He did nourish the hope, should I say the illusion, that World War I was a war to end all wars. It didn't. But those 14 principles that he had when he joined his counterparts for the negotiation of the Versailles Treaty serve even today as kind of norms for ideal structure of a state and ideal governance. And actually, this message of President Wilson had a strong appeal to Bulgarians, and especially one point of his proclamation, which promised the redrawing of the boundaries of the Balkan states along historically established lines of nationality. It didn't happen. It didn't happen not only for Bulgaria, but also for other countries. And unfortunately, one of the consequences of those treaties that were signed was the rise of nationalisms, and I don't want even to go into fascism and the reasons for the outbreak of World War II. But nationalisms have persisted, and here we are 100 years later, 25 years later, since the last, albeit Cold War ended, and we are again faced with the biggest, I would call it the most challenging threat and danger of nationalism. During the years of war, several key players on both sides of the Atlantic made the preservation of diplomatic relations possible at a time when they were on opposite sides of a world conflict. And then individuals associated with Robert College, such as Cleveland Dodge, were among those who managed to persuade President Wilson and some other leading senators not to declare war on Bulgaria and Turkey in December 1917 and April 1918. And interestingly enough, Bulgaria has never ever been formally in war. Neither side declared war on the other country until the very end of World War II, which is kind of very interesting, very different state of relationship compared to how other countries engaged in the world conflicts reacted to one another. In addition to the diplomatic relations, this interwar period practically from 1919 to 1941 brought about new opportunities for direct person-to-person interactions between Bulgaria and the US. During that time, American charities were able to help ordinary Bulgarians, despite the fact that many Americans at home were needy themselves, through a lot of charitable work. John Rockefeller's funds, for example, aided in the construction of the Faculty of Agronomy at the University of Sofia. American aid was sent to help victims of the earthquake in southern Bulgaria. Americans began to grow more and more aware of Bulgaria in these years through cultural and charitable actions, such as the founding of the American Kindergarten in Sofia by Miss Elizabeth Clark. During that period, in 1926, the two schools, the school for boys and the school for girls, merged and were transferred from Samokov to Sofia to start or to create the American College, which is considered to be the oldest American educational institution outside the territory of the United States of America. The expansion of the college continued till the end of the 1930s. It was closed during World War II and during the communist regime, to be reopened in 1992, and it managed to rebuild its reputation as one of the best schools in Southeastern Europe. Of course, the era of the Cold War marked or impacted most areas of relationship between the two countries. But one should say that, as I mentioned earlier, even then, communication and exchanges were not completely severed. They were maimed, they were restricted, they were limited, but never 100% interrupted. As I mentioned already, American influence during the different periods of Bulgarian-US relations has been most prominent in the field of education. And after the establishment of democracy in Bulgaria, this influence, of course, became even stronger. Apart from the American College in Sofia, which prepares students for the most prestigious universities, back in 1991, the American University was opened here in Blagoevgrad. I'm skipping this one because it would be shameful not to, all of us, not to be so very well aware of every step on the road to the present-day campus of AUBG here. Those of us who remember the beginnings and the party headquarters can never stop admiring the work of all those who made it possible. Thank you, ABF, too, because it was mentioned, but I really, really need to mention it now, looking at this campus, which can be any place in the US. Thank you. I would like to briefly take you through other forms of educational and cultural exchange between the two countries. And I want to mention very briefly the Fulbright Commission, which formally started work in 1993. And its mandate was renegotiated in December of 2003 indefinitely. And this is a great source of opportunities for exchanges, cultural, scientific, educational. USAID, of course, another very, very well-known benefactor of Bulgaria in general. I would only say that the United States was Bulgaria's largest donor during the country's transformation through the various forms of assistance coming from USAID or USAID. I have to mention something here which will always keep me as grateful, as appreciative as few things in my own life. And this is the Peace Corps. I remember a cold, dark, winter evening when we had electricity rationing, food rationing, you name it. And when I'm going as a member of parliament in one čitalište, that's something I'll talk to you about a little bit later, those library clubs, you see the difference. The Bulgarians will immediately mark the difference in rendering the meaning. Trying to talk to some people and explain to them that, yes, it is dark and cold and hopeless, but there is a bright future and we have to make sure that we work for that. And there were those guys, your age, sprawled on the floor, talking cheerfully, nothing seemed to bother them, and talking in English, which was kind of almost science fiction. I said, who are you? How come I have these English speakers here? These were two Peace Corps guys who had traveled on the Peace Corps program to Bulgaria to help with anything, be it parliamentary work or helping out people in the community. Anyway, this was my first contact. When I went to work officially in Washington, believe me, these were the people whom I first approached. And to this very day, they have their annual meetings on Bulgarian territory at the embassy. When we need some help with national days, they would come and help. All of them speak some Bulgarian, and they would very sweetly, in Bulgarian we have both the polite form and the familiar form of address. Of course they do use the familiar. It will be very, very strange for them to use the plural, more formal way. And it is the best experiences, because this is not scripted. You cannot invent this. They're just there. And this is a core, a pro-Bulgaria core, which is out there in America, always ready to come forward and talk nice things about this country and about these people on the basis of their experiences here. This is an organization which taught me true voluntarism. The Bulgarians in this room know, and probably not just the Bulgarians, that voluntarism was one of the new concepts of democracy. Public was one of the new concepts that democracy brought to us. And two more typically American things: sharing and giving back. As Jack Lemmon famously said, when you're up and the lift had taken you up at the last floor, make sure that you press the down button. And this is an amazing way. I'm mentioning the Peace Corps, but this is, I think, mostly the way in which American thinking goes. Yes, give back and share. This is unmatched in terms of value, of virtue. Having said this, I do go to the Čitalište part, which will be the end of my examples of this cultural interaction. I was privileged to sign out there the first agreement with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for the library project. Basically, it comes down to the fact that it's co-matched, co-financed, matched, co-financed, whatever, but a project worth some $15 million with the purpose of sending out both computer technology and experts to our Čitalište, which is another unique. This is Buditelji. The Buditelji are in the Čitalište. Čitalište is, yes, it is the local club, it is the local library, it is the local drama circle, it is the local place where Bulgarians will get together to sing, dance, to chat, to gossip, just to hang out. This is a hangout place, which started hundreds of years ago, before the missionaries even came to this country. That was in the darkest times of foreign domination. And it has this beautiful word, Čitalište, which comes from the verb read. Reading place, that's probably the closest one goes. And I was, of course, in close contact with the Librarians Association of the US. I know the main factors on the US side who interacted. We had them come over to over 900 small Čitalište all over this country. Computers are there, training is there, and this is huge. And I only hated that not much has been, or not enough has been said about this publicly. This is what we need to talk about when we talk about America. And it has to be a daily topic to show how this people-to-people contact goes. And you know what? Why I started with Buditelji in Bulgarian? My American librarian friends, they refuse to use any other word. They forbade me to use library club or, no. This is Čitalište. A little bit, that's the English phonetics. Čitalište, and they would persist. Nothing can make them use any other word. Again, you cannot invent this. So what I'm trying to say, what I tried to say today and to tell you is not only history in terms of years and periods and facts, but the spirit that was that was guiding all these people whom we can only read about today. I want to know, no, that's too pompous, too conceited. I want to hope that our graduates will leave this beautiful campus with the self-consciousness that they are the carriers, that they're the holders of legacy. Of course, AUBG legacy, but a much longer legacy, actually, of a relationship between two nations that have been around for much longer, and that everybody has left an important stone, building brick, in a unique relationship which I believe we are all called upon to preserve, cultivate, take care of tenderly, warmly, in order to make sure that it will continue to grow. Thank you.
Thank you very much for an enlightenment lecture. We have time for a few questions, so please.
Maybe I'll have a seat finally. Oh, thank you.
Please.
As we all know well, how well the relationships between our two nations go, and we're in a trend that turns in that probably. Should we achieve more than what we have now?
If I was talking to a journalist, I would say a visa waiver program. Which we will, not right now, not immediately, not as easily, but believe me, when we do get in, it will be for good reasons. It will be a solid presence of Bulgaria there. It will mean that we have done more to be good applicants and good visitors of the United States of America. What we need to do more is make sure that because of its huge variety of responsibilities and expectations placed upon it, America will find a bigger share of interest to our region and to Bulgaria. It's a funny situation with America. America gets criticized when it is too visible, when it intervenes, and it is criticized when it doesn't intervene. That's a very, very uncozy situation, and believe me, I feel with my American colleagues and friends, but at the end of the day, America is vital. So we have to make sure that we come up with interesting enough suggestions, realistic ones, and now obviously I'm talking of a much bigger area of possibilities. We must be very specific, very concrete. In today's world, in America, in order to get their attention, you have to be very clear, specific, well-founded when you offer a project, a program, or a specific new area of mutual action. We need to do that as Bulgaria. Oftentimes we are not good at formulating our own needs. We know that we want something, and we want really to have, because my other short phrase is, the more America in Bulgaria, the better for Bulgaria itself. Okay, we may agree on that, but you have to come up with something specific. The other thing, which is very important today in the new environment. And this is why AUBG is so special. We cannot that easily sell, in the good sense of the word, just Bulgaria. We are much more powerful when we have a regional suggestion to make. It may not be the whole, and it cannot be hardly the whole of Southeastern Europe, but in 2 or 3 country formats, we can be really very attractive to our American partners. So a more, how should I put it, practical, more managerial approach to shaping out our desires.
Thank you, Ambassador Poptodorova, for this great historic look back. Mine is not so much of a question, but I was really inspired by your words and what you said of this great, I guess, not only cooperation, but commitment to America throughout the years and ages. And what better confirmation of America's commitment than the America for Bulgaria Foundation? Of course, I'm partial, being a director of the foundation, but you know, the sign of ultimate giving and commitment of American people that we saw and heard about throughout the years continues to this date, and this is really promising. I mean, having a major U.S. philanthropic organization of this magnitude, the largest in Central and Eastern Europe, and perhaps in all of Europe, of this size and of this type in perpetuity, really investing in Bulgarian education and cultural heritage and arts and culture and improving the civil society is really a commitment to an ally and continues this cultural brew throughout the years. So we are really proud that we are not only helping AUBG, great educational institutions, but helping Bulgarians from all walks of life and from all over the country to continue that great tradition that you spoke about. And before I heard about all these well-known facts, and one probably, and there's many other examples, of course, of U.S. missionaries starting these early days, a little known fact to Bulgaria, but when I started with the foundation, I found about it and I visited, is an agricultural school founded by Edward Haskell in a small town near Pleven called Pordin. Of course, today, very little has remained from this school. And the same missionary had founded a farm school in Thessaloniki, which is a fledgling educational institution. But that's yet another sign of this great tradition. And I really appreciate you reminding us of that. And we are proud to be following suit in that tradition, and hopefully to continue to do the things that we do, not just with AUBG, but with hundreds of schools around the country and Čitalište and cultural institutions and others. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I fully concur with what you said, because that takes me to another memorable moment when actually the fund was first announced in 2008 when President Bush was here. And that was, again, you can see history relived again, because what ABF does is practically single out and support Bulgarian talent, full stop. It may be education, it may be arts and culture, it may be science, it may be unknown, even unknown groups of people who are trying to make a contribution, to make a change. So that's unique. I don't know of any similar role of any other institution. In all honesty, sometimes it's embarrassing that Bulgarian institutions are not in a position to do as much is even an overstatement. What ABF does, and this is something which takes me back to this deep respect that I have for the American tradition in these values that I mentioned. And the non-Bulgarians may not well understand that. And that's why I dwelt on the role of AUBG, not only as an educational institution. ABF gives a very intimate, very authentic face of America. ABF cannot even appreciate how important that is. I must tell you that, to me at least, oftentimes America is mistreated or unfairly treated. What America is those values that I was talking about: sharing, giving back, voluntarism. If someone misses the point in highlighting how America came into being through these values of self-support, mutual support, solidarity, empathy, then we don't know what America is all about. And ABF, through an appropriate channeling of activities and funds, is the most powerful influence of creating the adequate and fair perception about America today in this country.
Yes, if I may add, thank you, Ambassador Poptodorova, and thank you for your comments. And if I can bring this together and give it another dimension, there is a ripple effect that goes beyond Bulgaria. We have almost 40-45% of non-Bulgarian students at AUBG. And they are the recipients of this ripple effect of this collaboration over the years. And even though they may not be direct recipients of scholarships, they still enjoy the facilities, they still enjoy the values that are instilled through their education. And they are direct recipients, but at the same time, we may consider this to be like a ripple effect of this Bulgarian-American cooperation, educational or otherwise.
Thank you for making the point, because we can talk so much about the variety of roles which the institution plays. We want to increase these numbers on a yearly basis, and you should come to our closed board meetings to hear of how we discuss recruitment and the challenges that obviously all institutions face today. But this is absolutely true. I need to give an example of how important this multinational character of the institution is. I will give an extreme example, which, however, is important to tell you that in regular times the institution can serve even more fully its purpose in terms of bringing together the different population groups. At the time of the Yugoslav wars, here on campus we had everybody: Macedonians, Serbs, Montenegrins, Kosovars, Greeks, very few, one or two, yes, but still at that time we had one or two. Of course, Bulgarians, but I'm talking about former Yugoslavia. At the height of the wars there, these young people were not only sharing an institution. I'm an eyewitness of how they would get together. They may argue, they may worry, they may suffer over what's going on in their home country / countries, but they were together. And this is something which made me believe that this institution really is not only on paper such a focal point geopolitically. So I not only confirm, I've lived through that, and that was one of the most fabulous experiences here.
You pointed out that the United States has a long tradition of volunteerism and promoting human rights, and I just wondered if in your position, Ambassador, do you ever feel uncomfortable when examples of U.S. hypocrisy are exposed and when U.S. money ends up supporting genocide? now of Ukraine? Since you mentioned Yugoslavia, there's some parallels.
I did mention Yugoslavia. What I want to say on this one, the important thing about America is that in America you have less of concealment of facts than you do in some other countries. And I'm not mentioning other countries' names. American money going into genocide directly today, I don't know of. Would you please go? Yeah, I know, but what American money went where? I just want you to give me an example, and then I'll comment, of course, very openly.
I would give a lecture.
No, not a lecture, just to what part of that genocide?
Kyiv this year, February 21st, the United States ended up supporting a government.
You're talking about Maidan?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry to say that my government supports Maidan too. So you count us in the group of genociders.
I'm not saying it was purposeful, but what's happening right now in Ukraine.
We are part of the genocide, if you call it that way. I don't. So I'm afraid we have a different readout of the events in Ukraine. It is unfortunate, absolutely unfortunate. But I don't know that there is just one guilty party and another innocent party. I don't know that. I think that what happened with the annexation by force of foreign countries' territory is...
After the February 21st.
Yes, because, yes, it came after, because they were denied a free choice.
Who was?
The Ukrainians.
What about the Ukrainians who voted for Yanukovych and then saw Yanukovych overthrown?
Yeah, he was overthrown because he was trying to keep Ukraine. Yeah,
This is what's causing
Yeah.
the civil war now.
yeah. Yanukovych was overthrown for what he was. He was practically defending and how should I say, and I'm trying to be careful with words, not only defending, he was proactively applying policies prompted by a foreign country. Is that clear enough?
And I've lived in Ukraine. I've seen
Can we
the
move
corruption
this
that
discussion for
Yanukovych.
Beg your pardon?
after, so it can be just...
No, I'm perfectly comfortable. I'm perfectly comfortable. Yeah.
I lived in Ukraine for 2 years. I've seen
Yeah.
the corruption.
Yeah. Oh, you know, corruption, yes, you can see it in this country as well. That, absolutely, that's what it is. I think we're talking geopolitics here, not rule of law. Rule of law is something I'm very sensitive about, beginning with my own country. We are talking geopolitics. That's what we're talking.
The rule of law based on free elections?
It is, of course it is.
Why did we support this? Why did the United States support this government based on a seizure of power and not elections? Because Yanukovych was going to have elections this next month. He was going to step down. And
Yes, and he was going to, if the Maidan didn't happen, without the Russian tanks that crossed the border of a sovereign country later on with Donetsk and Lugansk, you say that, I say there is, we can argue, I agree. You say no, I say yes. You say yes, I say no. There is a song.
say something that's not based on facts.
You say something which is not based on facts either. You see, even last week there was a NATO information which went also public about the crossing of new convoys again.
That we have evidence, but we're never shown it.
I don't know how you want to be shown. I can do something for that. I can ask something, and I can bring you people if you want to have something shown right here, right in here. We can do that. We can do that.
I have Ukrainian friends, and it's just sad.
No, I understand that, but listen, if Mr. Yanukovych did not back out from it was an association agreement with the European Union, and he would back out of it, and he would destine himself one-handedly. You're talking about overthrow. He usurped one-handedly the future of his country. What are we talking about? What are we talking about here? And he fled with his old golden bathtubs and exuberant palaces, which we were, that I saw. I don't know about you. I saw that. That was something. That was something. Even Bulgaria couldn't match that one. So anyway, so he flees like that. He hides comfortably under Mr. Putin's wing. And now he's the innocent victim? I beg your pardon. I'm really worried if our students at AUBG would learn this story about Ukraine, and I'm very serious on that. I'm very serious about this now. I agree, absolutely. But backing from teaching in an EU member country, I'm not even mentioning NATO, which is very important. And you're teaching in an EU country, in an American university, and if you're telling our students that, let me finish my sentence, please, that it was okay for Mr. Yanukovych one-handedly to doom his country to a non-European development, that's a no-go for me. That's not the correct readout of the situation in Ukraine. Talk to them about the Baltic states, who are, you know what fear you find there about what their future will be. Talk to them to Transnistria. Why don't you talk about the frozen conflicts everywhere? Crimea becoming a frozen conflict itself now. I'm sorry, every loss of human life is dreadful. And I can cry over those who lost their lives, and I know there were very ugly scenes there, but it didn't start on that evening of the Maidan. It didn't start there and then. I know the US may have gone with boots, and I know Tori is a good friend, Miss Newland is a good friend. I said, oh my God, that was not the best way to describe it. But the English speakers know that the F word is not the way it was interpreted, which was another kind of very skillful, manipulative, linguistic interpretation. But we all know that you can hear it at, I don't know, every 5 minutes from anybody. Film, movies, in life. We have similar words in Bulgarian.
I think some people object
You see,
to the fact that he was recommending who would be the next leader.
I know, that I agree on that.
An example of
Yeah.
interference in the affairs of a sovereign country.
I agree on that. That's her. I've known her for many years. That's the personality, and that was unfortunate, I know. Of course, she never expected she would be leaked. That's the other thing. But I'm sorry, I may have been very explicit. I always prefer to speak my mind because everything else is more complicated. But on this one, I know how hard it was for my people to move from one system to the other. We are not yet even there. We still suffer so much subversive influence in this country that I cannot be just a nominal observer or commentator of the events there.
Ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Can't we come together to offer aid jointly? Because Russia, Sergei Lavrov was appealing to the EU, saying, why don't we put together a financial condominium consortium of aid to Ukraine? He was saying, don't make the Ukrainians choose between the West and the East. Why did we have to make it this East-West issue? Why couldn't we have helped countries jointly?
Well, let the Ukrainians decide.
Maybe that was the first step.
No, I think that the best thing to do is for the Ukrainians to decide. I don't think they should be their choice should be decided anywhere else. I agree. It shouldn't be Moscow, it shouldn't be Brussels. Let them.
Split. Not all Ukrainians wanted to.
I know. And it was Russia, unfortunately, who first suggested, and Mr. Lavrov, who suggested division of the country. You remember when he publicly said, okay, and Mr. Putin too.
No,
let's split.
Let's cooperate.
Oh, well, I think I remember also another line when it was a spectrum, it was the ghost of separation was looming when they were, and that would have suited Russia very, very well. I think this is what they eventually want. Look at the frozen conflicts, they follow a pattern. it's a pattern when you look at Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, then Moldova as well. Crimea now is another one. It is pulling territory away from a country. It cannot be just added, except for Crimea, which was done unconditionally. But the intention is to never give it back in terms of influence and administrative arrangements even to the nominal country. I mean, these are territories pulled away from a bigger country. And I don't see that as a solution. Obviously, we will see more with Donetsk and Lugansk. We will have to see a lot more, and that's what worries me. That will have an immediate effect. Sorry, an immediate effect on Transnistria itself. Bulgaria is, excuse me, but I think Bulgaria, or of Bulgaria, is almost a frontline state with all the influence that we have.
A buffer state?
If you count, pardon?
A buffer state?
Frontline. Maybe, I call it frontline, but I'm afraid of what you said. Because if we grow to become a buffer state, then that's a sentence, a judgment passed on Bulgaria. Bulgaria will never have full independent existence, even within the EU. It will always be considered the weak link. If we somehow allow to be perceived as a buffer state, that's what we would have been if we weren't part of EU and NATO. Forgive me. When discussing Ukraine, I think I'm talking about my own country. Believe me, and I can tell you why I'm so sensitive and so worried, because of very unproportionate and sometimes hard to evaluate influence of Russia in this country.
Thank you very, very much. I've been given very rigid
We got dangerous.
time. I would just, as a last question, and to use my moderator privilege, is to ask you if you think this anniversary and historic moments are an opportunity for bridge building between America and Europe and Bulgaria, both the 100 years and the 2025.
This bridge thing is kind of an interesting metaphor. And it is very important, yes, to have bridges or open doors maybe in the walls, we don't know that. But it's important what crosses the bridge. So yes, we need to have bridges. Yes, it's important to know how the traffic goes. So that's my brief reaction.
Thank you very much. I'm going to let Asen close.
I have several planned thank yous for the end and several forgotten, as your words were very kind, but you always risk forgetting somebody. Thank you for the librarians to hosting the discussion. Thank you for every single event you're doing here. The plant, you already know, and those of you who are late and don't, we have among us several directors from the American Bulgaria Foundation, and Michael Dunn, who is one of the trustees of the foundation. Welcome on campus. There we have a short program this afternoon at the university. As far as I know, Michael Dunn hasn't seen the university before. I hope you enjoy your stay at AUBG. I would like to thank AUBGTalks for recording this conversation. We will have it online for everyone that cannot attend today to view. The world apparently split on many questions today, and the Ambassador Elena Poptodorova Distinguished Lecture Series is a forum for discussions. So we'll be having several in this academic year, very interesting upcoming with Ambassador Poptodorova herself. And this is probably my final thank you for today. Thank you for coming again. Thank you for your
This program is brought to you by AUBGTalks. For more, please visit us at aubg.edu/talks.